The hall of the castle was quiet, save for the soft echo of footsteps on cold stone floors. Lady Alara walked slowly through the corridors, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow that belonged to no one. The banners above swayed gently in the faint breeze that slipped through the cracked windows, their colors dull in the dim torchlight. Once, these halls had been full of laughter and celebration, her name whispered with admiration in every corner. Now, at 28, she was a shadow herself. Considered too old to be a bride, to past her time to matter in a world that prized youth and beauty above everything else, her father, the once proud Duke of Valamir, sat in his high chair in the great hall, his eyes flicking over the nobles who had gathered for the evening's feast. He tried to maintain a smile, but it faltered as he noticed Ilara's slow approach. Murmurs spread through the assembled crowd like wildfire. "She is still unmarried," someone whispered. "She's far too old," another added, the words sharp as knives. Ilar's hands clenched lightly at her sides. She had heard it all before, countless times, and each repetition cut a little deeper than the last. She reminded herself that she was more than a bride for alliances. She had intelligence, strategy, and a strength few could match, but in this world, none of that mattered if one was past a certain age. The feast began, with roasted meats, fragrant breads, and goblets of rich wine. Nobles laughed, exchanged flattery, and whispered behind fans and hands. Alara took her seat at the far end of the table, where she would be least noticed. She lifted her chin, keeping her expression calm, a mask she had perfected over the years. But tonight, the air carried a tension unlike any before. The doors to the hall burst open, and a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance, where a figure stood framed in shadow and torchlight. Kale, the alpha of the northern clans, the man whose name alone struck fear across kingdoms, had arrived. He was tall, his presence commanding every gaze. His eyes, sharp and dark, scanned the room as though he were hunting. Yet there was something deeper in their gaze, something that made even the most confident nobles falter. Alara felt it immediately. His eyes fell upon her, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of recognition and something like hope. The court had long feared Kale, spoke of his ruthless power, his unmatched strength, and his merciless tactics. Yet now, he was looking directly at her, and it was as if all the whispers and judgment around her disappeared. Kale moved through the hall with quiet certainty. Every noble shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to bow, to flee, or to speak. He ignored them all. His attention was fixed solely on Alara. When he reached her, he stopped. The silence was almost unbearable. He extended a hand, his presence so strong that it seemed to pull at her very soul. "You," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Stand." Alara's heart raced. The court was watching, holding its collective breath. She obeyed, her own strength rising in defiance to the fear that threatened to root her to the spot. "You are too old to be a bride," Councilman muttered, as though stating fact rather than opinion. Kale's gaze did not waver. He bent slightly and placed his hand over hers, a touch so firm it sent a pulse of energy through her. The world seemed to pause, the torchlight flickering as if it too were aware of the moment. "You are mine," he said. His words neither question nor suggestion, but a declaration that shook the very air of the hall. Gasps echoed. Alara's father's face went pale, and whispers turned to murmurs of disbelief. The nobles stared, unable to comprehend the audacity. Kale's hand remained on hers, and she felt a strange warmth. A recognition that this man feared by all saw something in her that no one else did. Ilara's pulse raced, and a conflict stirred inside her. Fear and fascination, dread and longing, collided in a storm she had never felt before. She looked into Kale's eyes and saw not only power and dominance, but something hidden, something fragile, yet unyielding. The court erupted into murmurs, but Kale ignored them. He stepped back just enough to give her space, yet his presence filled the room like a shadow that could not be escaped. "Do you understand?" he asked quietly, yet the words carried through the hall. Alara swallowed hard. She nodded, unsure if she fully understood, yet drawn by a force she could not name. Cale turned then, scanning the room one last time, a warning in his gaze. "This is no longer your concern," he said to the court, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She belongs to me." And just like that, the Hall of Whispers fell silent. Nobles who had considered themselves untouchable glanced nervously at one another. For the first time, fear and respect intertwined. A reminder that power was more than armies and titles. It was the ability to claim, to protect, and to choose. Eller, alone in the storm of gazes and whispers, felt the weight of her new reality settle over her shoulders. She was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one dismissed as past her time. She was something else entirely, caught between terror and awe, and the pull of a man whose reputation was built on power alone. Later, in the solitude of her chamber, she held Cale's touch in her memory. It was firm, commanding, yet strangely protective. She could still feel the warmth, the unspoken promise of possession, not in ownership, but in recognition. Something in her stirred, a desire to rise, to meet him on equal footing, even in the face of fear. Outside, the wind howled through the castle battlements. Shadows danced across the stone floors, echoing the tension and uncertainty that had settled over her life. For the first time in many years, Alara wondered what it would mean to be chosen, to be seen for all that she was and all that she could be, yet doubt lingered. Cale was a man of power, of legend, of fear. Could she trust him? Could she survive being drawn into a life where desire and danger were intertwined? The questions gnawed at her. But the memory of his gaze, the firmness of his hand, and the echo of his words lingered like a spark she could not extinguish. As the moon rose high above the castle, Alara stood at her window, looking out into the dark forest that stretched beyond the walls. Somewhere within that forest, Cale waited, a storm of power and promise. She did not know what the future held, only that nothing would ever be the same. And as the night deepened, a single thought burned in her mind. He has claimed me. But will I survive what comes next? The first threads of destiny had been woven, and the kingdom itself seemed to hold its breath. In the shadow of fear and power, a story of longing, challenge, and transformation had begun. The morning sun had barely pierced the tall castle walls when Lady Alara awoke with a start. The events of the night before played over and over in her mind the way Cale had strode through the hall. The cold certainty of his gaze, the weight of his hand on hers. It was as if the world had shifted, and she had stepped into a new reality she neither expected nor fully understood. Her chamber was quiet, yet the silence felt heavy. She could still feel the echo of his touch, a pulse that seemed to linger in her very bones. She dressed slowly, her fingers tracing the folds of her gown almost absent-mindedly. There was a sharp edge to her thoughts, a mixture of fear and fascination she could not deny. Her father entered shortly after breakfast. His expression, a mixture of pride and worry. "Alara," he began, his voice low, "Cale has claimed you before the court. This changes everything." She nodded, unable to speak at first. "I know," she said finally, her voice soft, "but I do not yet know what it means. I only know that I cannot ignore it." Her father sighed. "He is feared for a reason. The northern clans follow him as if he were a storm. He does not bend easily to others. You must be careful." Lara's heart tightened. "I will be careful," she promised. Though a small part of her wondered what caution could do against someone like Cale. Later that day, the castle gates opened, and Cale arrived again. He did not enter with fanfare this time. His presence alone commanded attention. Guards stepped aside instinctively, and courtiers bowed, their fear palpable. But his eyes sought only Alara, scanning the hall as if no one else existed. When he reached her, he extended his hand again, though this time his gesture was less commanding and more deliberate, measured. "Walk with me," he said. Alara hesitated for a moment before placing her hand in his. It was a strange sensation, the warmth and strength of his touch. As they left the hall and stepped into the courtyard, she could feel the eyes of the entire castle upon them. Yet the world seemed to shrink around the two of them. Cale led her to the edge of the castle. Where the forest began, dark and dense, full of whispers and shadow. Do you understand what it means to be claimed by an alpha? He asked. His voice was calm, yet it carried an edge of authority that made her heart beat faster. I think I do, Elara replied carefully. It means trust. It means respect. It means power and responsibility. He nodded slightly. Yes, but it is more than that. It is a bond. One that binds not just the body, but the mind and the spirit. It is not always easy. There will be tests. There will be trials. Lara swallowed, her throat dry. And if I fail? Kale's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a weight she could not name. Then you will learn what it truly means to face yourself. They walked in silence for a time, the forest closing around them like a living wall. Shadows danced along the trees, and the wind whispered secrets in a language she could almost understand. For the first time, Elara realized that Kale's world was not just one of power and fear, it was one of complexity. Danger and strange ancient laws. You are not like the others, Kale said suddenly, stopping on a small hill overlooking a valley below. The forest opened before them, sunlight breaking through the trees in thin, golden beams. They see only what they desire or what they fear. You. You see beyond that? Elara looked at him, unsure what to say. She felt a pull toward him, a curiosity mingled with caution. And what do you see? She asked softly. Kale's gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. I see strength. I see fire. I see someone who does not bend, who will not break, even when the world tells her she must. For a moment, the tension between them softened, replaced by a quiet understanding. Yet beneath it lingered the unspoken truth. The bond they were forming would not be easy. Kale was a man of power, and Elara was stepping into a world that could consume her if she faltered. Their steps eventually led them to a small clearing, where the sunlight struck the forest floor in patches. Here Kale paused and reached into his cloak. He produced a small, intricate pendant, its metal dark but shining faintly in the sun. This is yours, he said. It is a token but also a warning. Wear it. It will protect you, but it will also remind you of the trials to come. Elara took it carefully, feeling the weight of both its beauty and its meaning. She fastened it around her neck, the chain cool against her skin. I will wear it, she said, her voice steady, despite the fluttering in her chest. Kale studied her for a moment, as if measuring her courage. Then, without another word, he led her back toward the castle. The walk was quiet, filled with unspoken understanding and the subtle tension of two forces learning to coexist. That night, Lara could not sleep. She kept touching the pendant, feeling its subtle pulse against her chest. It was as if it held a fragment of Kale's presence, a reminder that she was no longer alone in her solitude. She thought of his eyes, the intensity of his gaze, and the weight of his hand. She realized that she was not afraid, not entirely. Fear and fascination intertwined. She felt alive in a way she had not for years. The next morning brought more challenges. Nobles and advisors, eager to test Kale's claim and her resilience, approached her with questions, subtle jabs, and warnings. Do you know what you are stepping into? One asked. He is not a man to be trifled with. His ways are harsh, his standards even harsher. Elara met each with calm, measured words. I understand the dangers, she said, but I also understand that some risks are worth taking. Word of her courage and composure spread quickly through the castle. Some were impressed, others skeptical. But Kale had noticed, and that evening, when he returned to the castle, he called her to the balcony, overlooking the forest. The sky was a deep shade of purple, the first stars beginning to glimmer. Tonight, I will show you something, he said. He led her to the edge of the balcony and gestured to the valley below. Shadows moved through the trees, not entirely natural, as if alive. Kale watched them closely, his expression unreadable. These are the shadows of the northern forests, he explained. They are not entirely human, not entirely beast. They follow the old rules, the ancient laws that govern power and balance. One day you may see their necessity. One day you may need to understand them. Elara shivered, both at the sight and at the weight of his words. "I will learn," she said firmly. Cale turned to her then, his gaze softening for a moment, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the legend. "I believe you will," he said quietly. "But the shadows are not the only trials you will face. The world will test you at every turn. Your courage, your wisdom, your heart, all will be measured." Ilara felt the truth in his words. The bond he had claimed was not one of comfort, it was a call to rise, to face challenges that would shape her into someone stronger than she had ever been. As they returned to the castle, the pendant glimmering faintly against her chest, Ilara realized that her life had changed irreversibly. She was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one dismissed by time and expectation. She was walking beside a man who commanded fear and respect, and she would need every ounce of her courage to meet the path ahead. That night, in the quiet of her chamber, she held the pendant close. She thought of Cale's gaze, the power in his presence, and the trials he had promised. For the first time, she felt a thrill of anticipation beneath the fear. She was ready to face whatever came next. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the castle, the northern forest stirred. Shadows shifted, waiting. Cale's words echoed in her mind. "The world will test you, and you will rise." Ilara pressed the pendant to her heart, a symbol of her new path, her new bond. She did not know all the dangers to come, but she knew one thing with certainty: she would not step back. She would meet him, meet the trials, and find out if the fire between them could survive the storms ahead. The dawn was pale and gray, brushing the castle towers with a fragile light. Lady Ilara stood at the balcony, watching the northern forest stretch endlessly beyond the walls. The shadows of night had faded, but a tension lingered in the air, a reminder that the forest was alive and always watching. Cale had spoken of the shadows before, but now she felt the weight of his words pressing on her mind. Something was stirring, something beyond ordinary power. Cale appeared silently behind her, his presence as commanding as ever, yet softer in these quiet hours. "The forest will call to you soon," he said, his voice low, carrying both warning and reassurance. "It tests those it senses are important. It senses strength and fear. You will need to face it if you want to walk beside me." Ilara turned, meeting his gaze. She saw in him the same mixture of power and burden she had glimpsed before. "I am ready," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "Whatever comes, I will face it." Cale nodded, not entirely satisfied with words alone. "We leave today," he said. "There is something you must see, something that will show the true weight of the world we live in." Without another word, they mounted horses at the castle's stables. The beasts were tall, strong, and trained to follow Cale's command with perfect obedience. Ilara felt a thrill as she climbed onto her own horse. The forest loomed before them like a wall of green and shadow, yet she did not falter. The ride was silent at first, the only sounds the soft clatter of hooves against the dirt path and the rustle of leaves. Cale guided her through narrow trails, twisting and turning as the sunlight struggled to break through the thick canopy. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. After some time, they arrived at a clearing. Here, the trees opened to reveal an ancient ruin, half swallowed by roots and moss. Stones were worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Yet there was an unmistakable power in the place, a presence that made the hair on Ilar's arms stand on end. "This is the heart of shadows," Cale said, his voice reverent, yet filled with caution. "It is older than the clans, older than kings. Here, the world tests those who wish to claim power and those who wish to claim a bond that lasts." Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. The air was thick with energy, a hum that seemed to resonate in her chest. "What? What do I need to do?" she asked. Cale dismounted and held out his hand. "Follow me. Watch closely and trust what you feel. This place does not lie. It will show you the truth of your courage, and it will show you mine." They entered the ruin together. The walls were carved with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light, as if the stone itself were alive. Shadows moved across the floor, not cast by any visible object, but alive in their own right. Ilara's heart pounded, yet she did not step back. She trusted Kale, and a small flame of determination burned within her. As they moved deeper, the shadows began to shift. They took shape, forming figures of twisted light and darkness. Kale moved closer to Alara, his presence a shield as the shapes circled them. "These shadows," he said, "are a reflection of fear and doubt. They test the strength of your spirit. You will face them, or you will be trapped here with them forever." Ilara's breath caught. She had faced challenges before, but never like this. The shadows whispered, voices soft and cruel. "You are not strong enough. You do not belong here. You are too weak." She felt fear rise, but Kale's hand on hers steadied her. "Do not listen to them," he said. "They have no power except what you give them." Lara took a deep breath, centering herself. She stepped forward, moving toward one of the shapes. As she did, it changed, twisting into a figure that resembled her reflection, only darker. With eyes full of doubt, "You cannot do this," the shadow hissed. "You are too small, too old, too ordinary." Ilara felt the sting of truth in the words, yet she remembered Kale's presence, his trust, and the power in his gaze. "I am not ordinary," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I am here. I am strong. I will face what comes." The shadow recoiled, wailing softly as it dissolved into mist. Other shadows followed, circling and whispering, but with each step forward, Alara felt herself growing stronger. Kale watched her closely, pride in something softer passing over his face. Finally, he reached the center of the ruin, where a pool of dark water reflected the sky above. The surface rippled unnaturally, and in its depths images of past failures and fears appeared. Ilara saw moments from her lifetimes when she had been dismissed, overlooked, or told she was too old to matter. The images pressed on her chest like stones, yet she did not falter. Kale placed his hand on her shoulder. "Look at them," he said. "See them for what they are, not for what they say about you. You are not bound by their judgment. You are bound only by your choices, by your courage." Ilara looked down into the water and drew a slow, steadying breath. She spoke aloud, her voice carrying across the ruin. "I am not too old. I am not too small. I am not weak. I am Alara, and I will face whatever comes." The water stilled, the shadows around them dissipating like mist in sunlight. The ruin seemed to breathe, a soft sigh passing through the stones as if acknowledging her courage. Kale stepped forward, lifting her hand to his lips. "You have done well," he said softly. "You have faced the first trial and proven yourself, but this is only the beginning." Ilara felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The fear that had gripped her was replaced by a quiet pride. She had faced the unknown, and she had not faltered. She had stepped into a world of power and shadows, and had not been consumed. Kale studied her, his expression unreadable. "You are stronger than I expected," he said. "And that is why you belong to me." Lara's heart quickened at his words, but she knew the bond they shared was not simple. Kale was a man of legends and power, and she was only beginning to understand the path she had chosen. The forest beyond the ruin seemed alive with whispers and movement, reminding her that danger was never far, and that trials would continue as they mounted their horses to return to the castle. Alara felt the weight of the pendant against her chest. It pulsed faintly, as if alive, reminding her that the bond between her and Kale was more than words. It was power, trust, and destiny intertwined. The ride back was quiet, each lost in thought. The forest seemed to watch them, shadows lingering at the edges of vision, as if testing the courage they had already shown. When they reached the castle gates, the sun was low in the sky, painting the towers in shades of gold and crimson. Kale dismounted and offered his hand to Alara. "Tonight," he said, "we will celebrate what you have accomplished. But tomorrow, the world will test you again, and you must be ready." Ilara took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth that had guided her through the ruin. "I am ready," she said, though she knew the trials ahead would be unlike anything she had faced before. As she watched him disappear into the castle, she felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of fear, longing, and determination. She knew that the bond they shared was not one of comfort alone. It was a bond that demanded courage, tested spirit, and offered growth in return. She had already begun to change, and the path ahead promised even greater transformation. That night, as Alara lay in her chamber, she thought of the shadows, the ruin, and the bond with Kale. She traced the pendant along her chest and whispered to herself, "I am not afraid. I will face the trials. I will rise." And somewhere in the northern forest, the shadows shifted once more. They were not defeated, merely waiting, watching. The next challenge was coming, and it would not be easy. But for the first time, Alara welcomed it. She knew that with Kale beside her, she had a chance not only to survive, but to grow stronger than she had ever imagined. The castle slept under a moonless sky, the towers and battlements silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold night wind. Lady Alara stood at the edge of the balcony, looking toward the northern forest. It was there that the next trial awaited, the one Kale had hinted would define not only their bond, but the path of their lives. The shadows of the forest seemed darker tonight. Alive with movement that made the hair on her arms rise, Kale appeared behind her, silent as the shadows themselves. "The forest senses your strength," he said softly. "It also senses the dangers that approach. Tonight will test both of us." Lada turned to him, meeting his intense gaze. She felt neither fear nor doubt, only a quiet determination that had grown with each trial. "I am ready," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever comes, I will face it with you." He offered his hand, and she took it. Together, they descended to the stables, mounted their horses, and rode toward the forest. The path seemed narrower, darker, as if the trees themselves were closing in around them. Every step into the shadowed woods made Alara's heart beat faster, but she held on to Kale's hand. Trusting in the bond they had forged as they reached the heart of the forest, a cold mist rose from the ground. The shadows that had once been mere whispers of fear now took shape. Figures moving and twisting, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They were not just illusions this time. They were guardians of the ancient forest, bound to test any who dared enter its depths. Kale dismounted first and offered his hand to Alara. "Stay close," he warned. "They will try to find your fears. They will test your heart." Alara nodded, gripping his hand tightly. Together, they stepped into the clearing. The shadows moved, circling them, whispering doubts and fears. "You are not strong enough. You will fail. You are alone." Alara remembered the lessons of the previous trial. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "We are not alone," she said aloud. "We face this together." The shadows recoiled slightly as if her words had power. Kale stepped closer, his presence radiating strength and confidence. "Hold fast to what you know," he said. "The forest cannot harm what is united by trust and courage." Then the shadows struck. They moved like waves, shifting and stretching to block their path. Figures rose from the mist, more distinct than before creatures, shaped from darkness and light, reflecting both Kale's fears and her own. Alara felt her heart tighten as she saw shapes that resembled her family's disappointment. The whispers of nobles, even visions of her own doubts. "Focus," Kale said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not fight with anger. Do not run. Face them with your heart." Alara took a step forward, then another. Each step seemed heavier than the last, the shadows reaching to pull her down into fear. Yet she felt Kale's hand steady hers. Together, they moved, and with every step, the shadows lost strength. A figure of pure darkness lunged at her, a twisted mirror of herself, eyes glowing red. "You are too late. You are not enough," it hissed. Alara stood her ground, raising her head. "I am enough," she said, her voice firm. "I am strong. I am here. And I am not alone." The shadows shrieked and dissolved into mist. One by one, the other figures faltered, retreating into the fog. Kale moved beside her, guiding her to the center of the clearing, where the ground pulsed faintly with light. The energy here was different from the ruin before it was alive, aware and testing the bond they shared. Kale knelt and held out his hand. "Place your hand over mine," he instructed. "Let our strength combine. Let the forest see what binds us." Elara did as he said. The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy passed through her. It was not painful, but overwhelming, a mixture of warmth, power, and a strange sense of belonging. The shadows around them twisted and writhed, then slowly dissipated, unable to overcome the unity of their bond. The forest was still. The mists cleared, and the first rays of dawn began to pierce the canopy. Elara felt a sense of triumph, not just over the shadows, but over the fears and doubts that had plagued her for so long. Cale rose, his dark eyes softening as he looked at her. "You have proven yourself," he said, his voice quiet yet full of admiration. "Not only to the forest, but to yourself. You have strength, courage, and a heart that will not falter." Elara smiled, a mixture of relief and joy washing over her. "And you?" she asked. "Have you been tested too?" Cale's lips curved in a faint smile. "Every day," he admitted. "But tonight I have seen something in you that even I did not expect. You are more than worthy." The ride back to the castle was calm, the forest behind them quiet, as if acknowledging their victory. When they arrived, the castle itself seemed to welcome them, the walls glowing softly in the morning light. In the following days, Elara's presence at the court was different. Nobles who had once whispered behind her back now looked at her with a mixture of respect and caution. She walked with Cale by her side, not as a passive bride, but as a partner. Someone who had proven her courage and intelligence. Yet, even with this newfound recognition, Elara felt the weight of what was to come. Cale's world was not one of comfort, and the bond they shared demanded vigilance, courage, and honesty. She could sense that the forest, the trials, and the shadows were only the beginning of what awaited them both. One evening, as the sun set and the castle was bathed in golden light, Cale brought her to the highest tower. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scents of the forest and the distant mountains. He took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. "You have faced fear, doubt, and the shadows of the past," he said. "You have proven that you are not only strong but brave. And yet there is one final truth you must understand. Strength is not only in the body, but in the heart. In choosing to stand together, we make ourselves stronger than any fear or shadow." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief and joy. "I understand," she said softly, "and I choose to stand with you." Cale's expression softened further. "Then we are bound," he said. "Not by fear, not by the court, not by titles, but by choice, courage, and trust. From this moment, you are not only mine in name, but in spirit, in strength, and in heart." A quiet hush fell over the tower. The wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself had recognized the moment. Elara felt a deep peace settle within her. For the first time in years, she was not defined by age, expectation, or fear. She was defined by her courage, her choices, and the bond she had forged with Cale. That night, they stood together on the balcony, looking out at the northern forest. The shadows were gone, but she could sense the life and mystery still within it. She knew that the world beyond the castle held challenges yet unseen, dangers yet unknown. But she also knew that, whatever came, she would not face it alone. Cale placed his hand over hers again. "You have proven yourself to me," he said, "and I have claimed nothing that you did not freely give. We are partners bound by strength and trust. No one can take that from us." Elara smiled, the pendant around her neck catching the moonlight. "And I have chosen you," she said, her voice steady. "Not out of fear, not out of expectation, but because I trust you, and I believe in us." The forest beyond the castle seemed to whisper in approval. The shadows were gone, the trials behind them, and yet the memory of fear had shaped them, forged them into something stronger. Elara felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by the fire of purpose and the warmth of connection, in the quiet of the night. Under the stars and the protective gaze of the northern forest, Lady Elara and Cale stood side by side. The castle walls echoed with silence, but the bond between them pulsed with life, stronger than any shadow, stronger than any doubt. They had faced the trials, survived the fear, and emerged bound together by choice, courage, and the unspoken promise of all that lay ahead. And as the wind carried the whispers of the forest to the highest towers, a new chapter began. Not defined by fear or expectation, not bound by age or judgment, but by the strength of two hearts choosing to face the world together.